Welcome to the Nevcast, where three bros talk business, art, justice, and the pursuit of Jesus.
Any day above ground is a good day.
Get ready to laugh, cry, and kiss 30 minutes goodbye with Peter Nevland,
Dave Nevland,
and
Rashid.
Here we are. Welcome to the Nevcast.
And Rashid is not here today with us, but he's still with us.
He's still with us. He's still, wow.
Well, we're going to talk about mourning and grief.
Yeah, so we're not, that's not why we're talking about.
We're going to edit this part out.
Goodbye, podcast episode. You were wonderful. We loved you. Let's just why don't we just do an episode of bloopers this time?
Or something.
Let's say a lot of awkward things.
Get ourselves in trouble and not get ourselves out of it.
Yeah, that's great.
That's right. Great. Like, I'll make fun of you and then you make fun of me.
I don't think so. I hear my kids do that.
You feel like that's awkward.
Yeah, I hear my kids do that, and they like yell at each other and are arguing about silly things.
Your
and
kids,
I'm like,
wow, my kids do not do that.
Yes, awesome. That's right. This morning, my kids were arguing about who gets to turn the blender on. For the smoothie dance. And I'm like, The whole point of the smoothie dance is making it fun.
Right.
And you guys turned it into a fight.
Interesting.
Just about flicking a switch. And you can't agree with each other about who turns it on and who turns it off.
Well, see, because we was just coming back. So you used to fight with me about stupid stuff like that when we were kids.
I sure did.
I never did it with you, but you did it with me.
And ladies and gentlemen out there, if you want a tip on how to shut down an argument, agree with the person who is accusing you of something.
That's right. Agree quickly with your enemy. Is that what you're saying?
Agree with your enemy quickly.
What? I'm your enemy?
Yes,
that's
right.
What the heck?
In that moment,
not right.
You made yourself my enemy. Just agree with it.
I agree. I do. You're right. You're right. No, we used to fight over who could not fight. We would argue over who can. This is weird. It'd be a bad thing to fight. Well, this is a weird thing to fight about. Who gets to dry the knife off? The big knives off.
Oh, right.
After they were washed by hand.
You remember that? I don't even remember that.
Yeah.
Wow. Tell me about how you felt.
I don't know why we thought that was so special to be able to, because you had to do it in the right way.
Big knife.
And
it was kind of dangerous. It sort of was
something. Maybe. It was an adventure.
Yeah.
Who gets to have the adventure?
So I was listening to this podcast a little while ago, and maybe this is what, I think we decided that we were going to actually talk about after all of our awkward missteps in starting this episode.
Yeah, we got to get to it quick.
Yeah. So, and part of it was talking about vulnerability, but the most extreme part of vulnerability I heard on a podcast, and it was Adam Young on his podcast, and his podcast, The Place We Find Ourselves. And he had a lady on the podcast. She was a counselor, but she herself and her husband had gone through a number of miscarriages. And they actually have a film that talks about how they struggled to process those because there were so many people around them in the church who were just basically like either, get over it or no, everything's fine or it was part of God's plan, all those terrible things that people say.
I said something like that to someone one time.
Yeah. And so I think the name of the movie that they put out was called A Grief. Was it not A Grief Observed? That's somebody else.
That's C.S. Lewis, isn't it?
That's C.S. Lewis. It was something along those lines. But anyway, it was A Brave Lament. A Brave Lament was the name of the movie. If you want to check that out. But afterwards, after they had gone through a lot of healing from these miscarriages, she was in her practice. She was a counselor. And so she had this couple come in, and the husband was talking about how his wife had a mastectomy, and ever since she had a mastectomy, he had not been able to find her attractive. And she didn't know how to respond because she was like, I can that'd be hard on your end, but that's also hard on her end. I don't know what to do. She can't do
anything about it.
And she went to her mentor, and the mentor said that's exactly, the key to them recovering their intimacy, their physical intimacy with each other, their sexual intimacy, is in the touching of the scars.
Yeah.
Because that is actually the most intimate place. And so, so then, talking about that, it's like, wow. So we don't do that very often in our culture.
Corporately.
We don't do it corporately. We don't do it on a personal level with other people.
Yeah.
Our tendency is to hide what we would consider to be imperfections. Apparently, to God, they're not necessarily imperfections. They're actually the doorways to a deeper intimacy that we've been longing for, but we haven't been experiencing yet.
Well, and after Jesus was resurrected, he brought in closer to himself, to the disciples, especially Thomas, put your fingers here.
But Thomas said, I won't believe until.
I know, and Jesus did it anyway.
Isn't that interesting?
Right.
It wasn't, I don't think Thomas's thing was as much, maybe there were doubts that he had that Jesus was real, but I think in another way you could look at it a different angle and say Thomas was saying, hey, if you're just a ghost, if you're just a spirit, I'm not going to be able to know you in the way that I was knowing you before.
Yeah.
And until I can touch the places where you are actually wounded and feel your physical flesh and know that you're okay with me having access to your most vulnerable parts, then I'm not going to be comfortable giving you all of me in my most vulnerable part.
Yeah.
And Jesus goes, oh, I'm on for that.
Yeah.
That's actually what was on my heart. So please, his reaction was almost, please come in, put your fingers there. Yeah. And I'm sure that, we don't even talk about Thomas's reaction, because someone who is totally bitter and who is totally jaded would have put his fingers in the scars and went, and found another excuse.
Yeah,
what was Thomas's reaction? You know what Thomas's reaction was then?
Oh, Lord, my God.
My Lord and my God. And he falls on his...
Yeah.
Like,
he didn't say, my human, you're not... it's like...
No, right?
Like, my Lord, my God.
There was a deeper level of intimacy.
It's a Jesus' second incarnation in a way.
In a way, right. That was where...
He could have come back as a ghost, kind of floating around.
He could have come back perfect.
He still ate with them.
Isn't that interesting that his heavenly body bore the scars of his suffering that he made, and that he invites us. He's inviting us to actually meet him in this place of his extreme vulnerability to us.
Yes. And in Revelation, was the lamb come back? A lamb seeming as if it had been slain.
You could still see it.
That is weird looking.
You can still see the scar.
Oh yeah, I mean it's like, is it mangled? I mean it's just like that's pretty intense imagery.
Right.
Yeah.
But we don't go there very often as the Western church.
Right. Well, and then who were you? Peter. He did it. Jesus did it to Peter too. In a different way. A little bit more metaphorically, a little emotional. Yeah. Right. Feed my sheep. Feed my sheep. Feed me. Do you love me? Do you love me? Do me?
Three times.
Two different types of love, asking, and Peter responding with two different types of love. Right. We don't get it in the English, but it was Jesus restoring him. Right?
Yes.
Going to the scar, going to the 3 times.
Yeah, the memory. So what was
Peter feeling hurt?
So let's think about
asking him so many times, right?
So there's so apparently we have 2 different types of scars here, but both are a key to greater intimacy. One is a physical scar and another's emotional scar. Now, we've said in a previous podcast that, and also from, this Adam Young podcast where he talks about that the place where the brain processes pain for emotional pain is the exact same place that we process pain of physical pain.
Yeah.
So, but dealing with these, so with the physical scar, there needs to be touching that scar, and someone allowing you to touch that scar opens up a door to intimacy. For an emotional scar, Peter had an emotional wound because of his own actions,
right?
But still pain. Emotional pain was caused by his recognition that he had betrayed the one that he loved the most.
Yeah.
So Jesus comes back to
betrayed
him,
his own commitment even.
And Jesus needs to touch that scar. So he does it.
Yeah.
By asking him, do you love me? Do you have this great affection for me? It's like, oh Lord, you know that I love you. Okay, feed my sheep. But do you love me? He asked him a second time, the same way.
Yeah.
You love me. And then he says, Are you even my friend?
The third way.
Yeah, the third way.
Because the first two ways were unconditional agape love.
Yeah,
and Peter responds and says, "I love you as a friend."
Right.
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 And
then Jesus asked, "Well, do you even love me as a friend?"
And then Peter says, "You know
all things.
You know all things, right? Right.
You know that I love you."
And that's the agape one, unconditionally.
Yeah.
It's just really, I mean, that's.
He comes back with because he's like,
who wrote that?
I'm willing to commit. Wasn't it John?
It's just cool.
John's a great writer,
right?
By the way,
right.
I mean, he's the most symbolic of all the writers. Matthew is the detail,
right?
And Luke is the historian.
John waited until he could really. I mean, he had enough time to make it really good.
Yeah, he was the last of the Gospels to write it. But I thought that's powerful. If we have emotional scars, if we have emotional
how do we
wounds,
do this corporately? How does this come into corporate worship?
Well, let's first talk about individually. Okay. If you have emotional wounds, if you have emotional scars, and a lot of times...
I'm not comfortable with this. Oh, no, that's
you aren't?
That's the point. Never mind.
But there's always a kernel of truth in your little joke, Dave. So let's talk about
I was just identifying with our listeners.
Yeah, well, a lot of us aren't comfortable with this because it leaves you in a really vulnerable spot.
Yeah.
What happens if you expose a place where you've really been hurt emotionally to someone else?
Right.
And then either they don't listen.
Right.
Or they listen and seem to identify with you
and say the wrong thing,
or they say the wrong thing. But then what happens when you have this fantastic experience, and then they go out and then they maybe betray it to someone else,
sure,
or they just walk away and they never meet you again and go, "Oh yeah, that was a cool." Then
it could be even worse.
That could be even worse, right? Mm-hmm. That's even more disappointing.
The stakes are high.
The stakes are very high, and that's why I think that's why we don't do it.
Sure,
a lot. When we cover over our reluctance to do it with the attitude that, well, yeah, but what people really want us to be is perfect and have it all together.
Yeah.
We think that that's God's highest priority too, is that God's highest priority is for us to be sinless. Right? You have to be sinless before you can approach God. Isn't that what we've learned?
As I am holy.
Yeah, I mean, we learned that we couldn't get to God because of our sin.
It's the truth.
But that's not true.
Because he's made his way.
No, but it's not that we couldn't. We couldn't.
Well, right, exactly.
God, every time that somebody who is full of sin comes to the Lord and runs to Him, He always accepts them.
Right, that's right. Right,
and it says that it even says now there. If you go and look in the prophets, in the Old Testament prophets, it says your sin has separated you from me. But it's actually the choices that people have made to turn away from God.
Right.
Not their failings, not their mistakes.
And they weren't always like that. I mean, we have the Psalms that bring these things out. Bring sorrow, out. Bring doubt, bring repentance.
Bring cursing of God out.
Cursing of God. Yeah, bring just
that's in
angst.
Corporate worship.
And it wasn't, a lot of people say, oh, David wrote this, and some of these other guys wrote this, the psalmist wrote this, but it wasn't just their song. It was embraced by the whole congregation.
Right.
And it was feeling that it was coming from the whole congregation or the whole, nation, all the people. Right, it wasn't just one guy who wrote this. Oh, cool! And now we're going to keep this in a binder. And yeah. No, it was everybody that was feeling it.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, this has happened. It's there, but we don't do it in rah.
You can't do it in a rah culture.
And when it's happened, when it's come out, I mean, I would say 30 years ago, am I 30 years? Is it 30 years ago with Delirious? 30 years ago, basically, Delirious, 25 years ago, Obsession. I mean, a lot of the songs that they were writing at the time, the older generation was like, I don't know if we can express this. This is pretty heavy. This is how do you do this, And it was a special thing when you did it. And if you did it too often, then it was like you were kind of going there when you didn't necessarily need to.
But something was true about Delirious was that they seemed to have the balance of emotion, because when they had the subway bombing that happened in the London Underground, they came out with White Ribbon Day, and he said the song goes, "How can it be that God is love when blood runs down our city streets?"
Yeah. Okay. Right.
And it says, "Oh God, we pray for White Ribbon Day, and we long for joy to fill our streets again.
Right.
Only God can save our nation now." Right? And so there was this that thing went huge in England to the top of the pop charts, not just the top of the Christian charts.
Yeah.
And then we had another song.
Matt Redman did it. "Blessed Be Your Name."
Blessed be your name.
That was a response to 9/11.
Well, then Mercy Me did it in the U.S., and they wrote the song, "I Can Only Imagine What It Would Be Like," as a response to a loved one that he had dying, a child dying.
Yeah.
And where did that go? That didn't just make it big in the Christian charts. It ended up being big on every chart.
Yeah.
And people were playing it everywhere.
Yeah.
And it was a song obviously about Jesus, obviously about God. Why? Because he had the guts to be vulnerable, to express his pain, and that I don't always have it together, especially when I'm following Jesus.
Yeah.
But the cool thing is that I am drawing near to him.
Yeah.
And the cool thing is God says, if you'll draw near to me, I'll draw near to you.
Yeah.
And so I'm throwing out this thing of we need the balance of that. We need, we need when Uvalde happens and the school shootings happen. That's just, hour and a half away from us.
Right.
We need to have some corporate mourning for the state of things, not just in Uvalde, but also in our country.
Yeah.
The violence that keeps being perpetrated on people with in all sorts of different ways, that we need God to save us. We need God to rescue us.
We can cry out for God's healing. That is a corporate cry.
And to mourn
that
what
brings
has been
mourning.
lost.
It is mourning, right? It is mourning, but crying out for God's healing is mourning. And I'm just thinking of ways that make it so that it's more readily accessible on a corporate level, because it's not easy.
No, it's not easy.
And I don't exactly know the solution or have a great response, because I can also bring out stories of how there's been a time where it feels like there's a lot of apprehension in the air, and we've been able to overcome it by rejoicing in God's goodness.
That's true. There's that aspect too.
Yeah.
That also is very valid.
Yeah.
And so the understanding. What I just want to say is we so easily throw out the going there, expressing doubt. One of the things that we talked about with one of our past guests, Granville Jones, when he was on the show, is talking about being an administrator and, the school that he's wanting to have. Is he was saying, as kids get older, as kids get into junior high level, that a lot of times part of their natural emotional development is that they become argumentative. It's a natural part of child development. And most of the time, we want kids not to argue.
Right.
He said, I want to actually harness that and engage that argumentation. I want to engage their doubt. Mm-hmm. Well, what if
Lord,
argumentation
my argument,
and what if doubt is a natural part of spiritual maturity as well?
Right.
And instead of shoving it down under the rug and having to keep it silent and you're not allowed to have any doubts, what if they were able to be addressed even publicly, or at least with someone that you trust? But what if even corporately we address some of our doubts and our feelings, and then we let the Lord meet us and give us his response? Because I wondered, is the issue that we don't trust that God's going to show up and he's going to respond in a way that will give us peace?
Yeah, speak to us.
And give us a way to dance in the middle of our pain. That's it for the Nevcast this time. Join us next week when we talk justice, business, and art in pursuit of Jesus. We will see you soon.